When betrayal happens, the immediate pressure, whether it comes from others or from within, is often this: forgive. As if forgiveness is the moral benchmark, as if it proves emotional maturity, as if holding on to anger makes you small. But before you decide whether to forgive, you have to understand what forgiveness actually is. Most people confuse forgiveness with reconciliation. They treat them as a single act. If I forgive you, I take you back. If I release my anger, I restore your access. And this is where so much internal conflict begins. Forgiveness is internal, reconciliation is relational. Forgiveness is about your inner world. It is the gradual decision to stop feeding resentment. It is the choice to no longer rehearse the injury as the central narrative of your life. It is about freeing your nervous system from constant reactivation. When you forgive, you are not saying what happened was acceptable. You are saying, I refuse to let this define me. Reconciliation, on the other hand, is about rebuilding trust between two people. And trust is not restored by intention, it is restored by behavior. This distinction matters because without it, people either forgive too quickly or refuse to forgive at all. Some rush into forgiveness because they fear losing the relationship. They tell themselves that love requires immediate grace. But what often hides beneath that urgency is anxiety. Anxiety about abandonment, anxiety about conflict, anxiety about being alone. Forgiveness offered under pressure is not liberation. It is self-silencing. Others hold tightly to anger because it feels protective. Resentment can create a sense of strength. It keeps you vigilant. It reminds you that you were wronged. But prolonged resentment binds you to the very person you are trying to move beyond. It keeps the injury active in your identity. True forgiveness is neither rushed nor forced. It is a process of metabolizing pain. It is the slow reclaiming of your emotional space. And here is the crucial part. You can forgive someone and still decide they no longer have access to you. Forgiveness does not require proximity. This idea challenges many of our cultural narratives. We are taught that forgiveness is synonymous with reunion, that maturity looks like restoring everything to how it was. But sometimes restoring access without restoring trust creates deeper fractures. Because reconciliation requires evidence, it requires accountability without defensiveness. It requires transparency when secrecy would be easier. It requires patience with your healing process. It requires sustained behavioral change. Forgiveness is something you can do alone. Reconciliation cannot happen alone. And this is where many people betray themselves a second time. They do the internal work. They calm their anger. They soften their heart. And then, without sufficient evidence of change, they reopen the door. Why? Because they believe that forgiveness obligates them to. But inner peace does not require renewed intimacy. You can release resentment while maintaining boundaries. You can let go of bitterness without reestablishing trust. You can wish someone well and still recognize that the relational structure is no longer safe. Forgiveness is about emotional freedom. Reconciliation is about relational safety. Those are different goals. And sometimes the most mature decision is to separate them. When you forgive, you are choosing not to let someone occupy your psychological real estate rent-free. You are choosing to stop reliving the betrayal as if it is still happening. You are choosing growth over grievance. But when you reconcile, you are choosing to risk again. You are choosing to believe that the rupture can become a foundation for something stronger. That belief must be supported by evidence, not nostalgia. Love may remain, history may remain, but trust must be rebuilt, brick by brick. And if the other person is unwilling or unable to engage in that rebuilding, forgiveness still remains available to you. It simply does not require access. This is not cold, it is discerning. It allows you to remain compassionate without being naive. It allows you to protect your peace without hardening your heart. So before you answer the question, should I forgive? Pause and ask a different one. Am I seeking inner freedom or am I trying to restore connection at any cost? Because one is about healing, the other is about hope. And hope, without evidence, can become self-abandonment. Forgive to free yourself. Reconcile only if trust is rebuilt. Your peace does not depend on their proximity. Once you've separated forgiveness from reconciliation, the conversation becomes sharper. Because now, we are no longer asking, can I let go of resentment? We are asking something more demanding. Are they capable of repair? This is where emotion and discernment must be disentangled. After betrayal, love does not disappear on command. Attachment doesn't evaporate because trust was broken. You may still care deeply. You may still feel drawn toward the person. You may miss them, desire them, even defend them. None of that is unusual. Attachment is powerful precisely because it binds us beyond logic. But love is not the metric that determines whether reconciliation is wise. The real question is about capacity. Are they capable, not just willing in this moment, but structurally capable of repairing what they damaged? Repair is not an apology. It is not tears. It is not grand gestures. Repair is sustained behavioral transformation under pressure. Anyone can apologize when they fear losing you. Anyone can promise change in the immediate aftermath of exposure. But repair requires something deeper, the ability to tolerate shame without collapsing into defensiveness. This is where many attempts at reconciliation fail. Because accountability threatens identity. To truly repair, a person must confront the version of themselves capable of betrayal. They must say, without qualification, I did this, I hurt you, I chose this. Not, I was stressed. Not, you pushed me away. Not, it just happened. Those are explanations. Repair requires ownership. Ownership is stabilizing. It tells you that the person understands cause and effect. It signals that they are not outsourcing responsibility to circumstances or to you, but accountability alone is insufficient. The next layer is empathy. Can they sit with your pain without rushing you? Can they tolerate repeated questions without irritation? Can they witness your insecurity without framing it as overreaction? Because when trust fractures, your nervous system does not reset immediately. It remains alert. It scans for threat. And if the person who caused the injury becomes impatient with your healing, that impatience becomes a second injury. Repair requires patience. It also requires consistency. Trust is not rebuilt through intensity. It is rebuilt through predictability, through small, repeated acts of reliability, through transparency when secrecy would be easier, through choosing integrity in moments where no one would know otherwise. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Some people are not capable of this, not because they are evil, but because they lack the emotional maturity required for sustained repair. Emotional maturity includes impulse control. It includes the ability to regulate discomfort without escaping into distraction or justification. It includes humility, the willingness to admit, I am not as evolved as I thought. Without these capacities, reconciliation becomes cyclical. Apology, hope, relapse, apology, hope, relapse. And hope can be addictive. You may find yourself clinging to potential. You remember who they were at their best. You imagine who they could become. But reconciliation cannot be built on potential. It must be built on pattern. Pattern tells the truth. Watch what happens when the crisis energy fades. Watch how they behave when your pain is no longer new. Watch whether change persists when it is inconvenient. Time reveals whether remorse was emotional or structural. There is also another layer to consider. Sometimes the person is capable, but only if sufficiently motivated, and motivation often requires consequence. If you remove all consequences in the name of compassion, you may unintentionally remove the pressure required for growth. Staying too quickly can signal that the rupture was survivable without transformation. This is not about punishment. It is about information. Consequences communicate value. They say, this mattered. They create the conditions under which introspection becomes necessary. So when you are deciding whether to stay or to cut them off, do not center the question around your longing. Center it around their capacity for sustained change. Ask yourself, do I see humility? Do I see consistency? Do I see empathy that does not expire? Do I see behavioral shifts that endure beyond apology? Because love without repair becomes self-deception, and cutting someone off without evaluating their capacity may become avoidance. The goal is neither rigid detachment nor blind devotion. The goal is discernment. Discernment asks for evidence, not perfection, not flawless performance, but observable growth. Measurable change, a new pattern emerging where the old one once lived. And if that pattern does not emerge, no amount of affection will make the relationship safe. So before you decide, look beyond the apology. Look beyond your attachment. Look beyond who they were. Look at who they are becoming. Because remorse may be immediate, But transformation is the only reliable proof that reconciliation is possible. And after all of this, after you've separated forgiveness from reconciliation, after you've examined their capacity for repair, after you've clarified your boundaries, we arrive at the most important layer of the decision. Who are you becoming in response to this betrayal? Because betrayal is not only a relational rupture, it is an identity moment. It forces you to confront yourself, your patterns, your standards, your fears, your blind spots. It exposes where you may have overextended, where you ignored intuition, where you confused intensity for intimacy or attention for love. And this is uncomfortable. It is far easier to focus entirely on what they did. But if you stop there, you miss the transformational opportunity embedded in the pain. There are two common responses to betrayal. The first is contraction. You harden. You become suspicious. You tell yourself you will never trust like that again. You build emotional walls so high that no one can reach you. It feels powerful. It feels safe. But over time, it narrows your life. It reduces your capacity for connection. The second response is self-erasure. You rush to forgive without discernment. You lower your standards. You convince yourself that you are not that affected. You cling to the relationship to avoid the void that loss creates. This feels loving, it feels loyal, but over time, it erodes your self-respect. Neither reaction is growth, both are fear. Growth is integration. Integration means you allow the betrayal to inform you without defining you. You let it sharpen your discernment without destroying your openness. You refine your standards without weaponizing them. You begin to ask deeper questions, not simply, can I forgive? But, what did this reveal about what I tolerate? Not simply, should I leave? But what patterns do I need to break, regardless of this person? Not simply, will I ever trust again? But how can I trust more intelligently? This is where agency emerges. Agency does not mean you cause the betrayal. It means you control your response to it. It means you choose what meaning you assign to the experience. It means you decide what lessons you extract. If you decide that betrayal proves that people are fundamentally unsafe, you will approach every future relationship with suspicion, and suspicion has a way of creating the very distance it fears. If you decide that betrayal is information, that it revealed a misalignment, a lack of boundaries, an overinvestment without verification, then you walk forward differently, not closed, but conscious. The response you choose becomes part of your identity. You can become someone who avoids intimacy because it once hurt, or someone who understands that intimacy always carries risk, but that risk can be navigated wisely. You can become someone who reacts impulsively to protect pride, or someone who responds deliberately to protect integrity. And here is the subtle but profound shift. When you frame the decision this way, it stops being solely about the other person. It becomes about alignment. Does staying align with your values? Does leaving align with your growth? Does forgiving align with your peace? Does distance align with your self-respect? Alignment brings coherence, and coherence brings strength. Betrayal disrupts your narrative. It shatters assumptions about who someone is, about what your relationship meant, about what you believed was stable. But disruption can also create space to rebuild your identity with greater clarity. Sometimes the greatest transformation is not that you become less trusting, but that you become more selective. Not that you love less, but that you love with standards. Not that you protect yourself through isolation, but through discernment. The question is not whether betrayal will change you. It will. The question is how. Will it harden you into someone who avoids vulnerability, or refine you into someone who values it wisely? Will it push you toward cynicism or toward conscious choice? In the end, whether you forgive or cut them off is important, but even more important is the internal posture you adopt afterward, because the real risk is not that someone betrayed you. The real risk is that, in response, you betray yourself by abandoning your standards, suppressing your intuition, or closing your heart entirely. Pain is inevitable in human connection, but self-abandonment is optional. Once you've asked whether they are capable of repair, the focus shifts again. Now it is no longer primarily about their character, it is about your standards. This is where boundaries enter the picture. And boundaries, especially after betrayal, are often misunderstood. People assume that setting a boundary is an act of anger, that it is punitive, that it means you are closing your heart. But a boundary is not an emotional outburst. It is a structural decision. It is clarity about what you can and cannot participate in without eroding your self-respect. After betrayal, your internal world changes. Your nervous system becomes more alert. You notice inconsistencies more quickly. You feel the tremor of doubt more intensely. This does not mean you are dramatic. It means trust has been fractured. If you attempt to resume the relationship without adjusting its structure, you're essentially asking your body to relax in an environment that has not changed, and your body will resist. Boundaries create the conditions under which safety can potentially return. For example, you may require more transparency. You may require more frequent communication. You may require a slower pace of reintroduction into intimacy. These are not demands born from insecurity. They are conditions born from rupture. Healthy individuals understand this. They may find it uncomfortable, but they recognize that trust must be rebuilt differently than it was first formed. Unhealthy dynamics resist this. They frame your boundaries as punishment. They accuse you of holding on to the past. They pressure you to move on before your nervous system has stabilized. But here is the deeper truth. Boundaries are not about controlling another person's behavior. They are about defining your participation. You cannot control whether someone lies again. You cannot control whether someone chooses integrity. But you can control whether you remain in a space where integrity is inconsistent. This is where many people get trapped. They confuse tolerance with strength. They believe that enduring discomfort proves loyalty. They silence their intuition in order to preserve connection. And slowly, they begin to shrink. You may find yourself explaining away red flags, minimizing your anxiety, telling yourself you are overreacting. But if being in the relationship requires you to repeatedly override your internal signals, you are not rebuilding trust. You are suppressing yourself. Boundaries protect against self-betrayal. They allow you to say, if this pattern continues, I will step back. Not as a threat, not as an ultimatum, but as a recognition of your limits. Because limits are not cruelty, they are information. They communicate what you value, they reveal what you consider acceptable, and most importantly, they reinforce your own sense of worth. Cutting someone off when necessary is not revenge, it is coherence. It is aligning your external decisions with your internal standards. Sometimes distance is not about anger, it is about preserving clarity. If proximity keeps you in a constant state of vigilance, checking, doubting, monitoring, then the relationship may no longer be a space of growth. It may be a space of survival. And relationships are not meant to be survived, they are meant to be experienced. There is a difference between working through pain and enduring chronic destabilization. Working through pain involves movement. There is discomfort, but also progress. Enduring destabilization feels repetitive, the same conversations, the same doubts, the same reassurances that dissolve too quickly. Boundaries help you distinguish between the two. They also serve another function. They test the other person's commitment to repair. When you articulate a need clearly, their response reveals more than their apology ever could. Do they respect it? Do they negotiate it? Do they dismiss it? Do they resent it? A person who truly wants to rebuild will see boundaries as the framework for restoration. A person who wants comfort without transformation will see them as obstacles. And here is the paradox. When you hold firm boundaries, you create the possibility for healthier intimacy, either with this person or with someone else. Because intimacy without boundaries is fusion, and fusion often leads to resentment. But intimacy with boundaries is choice. It is two whole individuals deciding to meet without losing themselves. So the question becomes less about whether you are forgiving or cutting off. It becomes about whether you are honoring yourself in the process. If staying requires you to shrink, to silence your needs, to ignore your intuition, then staying is costly. If leaving allows you to maintain dignity and coherence, then leaving may be protective. Boundaries are not walls designed to keep love out. They are doors with hinges. They allow you to open and close with intention. And after betrayal, intention is everything. Because the real measure of strength is not how much you can endure. It is how clearly you can say, this is what I need to remain whole. So as you make this decision, do not ask only what preserves the relationship. Ask what preserves you. Because the person you become after betrayal will shape every relationship that follows. And that is the choice that truly matters.